So today we'll be talking about the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, which is a 1978 kung fu film, and then we're going to also be talking about the two 2000s movies, the Kill Bill volumes 1 and 2. So an integral part of both of these movies is the concept of martial art, the fighting style, or martial arts. And one of the big things that we're going to be sort of pulling into all of these films is that concept of myth ritualism, the relationship of myth and ritual. So an important, that important aspect that we brought up, martial arts, its role in both of these films. We can kind of think of martial arts as a sort of ritual in a sense. If we define this sort of ritual and martial arts in this instance as a repeated and relentless pain that is enforced on the physical body during rituals, during trainings, which are rituals, and each of these, acts upon the body as a way of sort of centering your consciousness and learning to control your body rather than letting it control you. So it's a very intensive way of being able to hone a skill, martial arts. And it has a history, it has a tradition. The people who are teaching this have been taught you're led to believe in these films in the same way, and they continue to teach their pupils, and the legacy kind of goes on. And film kind of lends itself to depicting these skills because you get the benefit of montages and very fast skips between time to show them initially being awful at the skill and then mastering the skill, and along the way learning important things about how to not even just attack other people but be conscious of your own body and sort of how to manipulate other people's force when it's exerted upon you. So in this context, we can kind of see that ritual symbolizes the meaning of myths because all of these trainings have a connection to some sort of tradition, to in this case, particularly martial arts, they seem to have a lot of connections to some kind of religion, or at least a legacy of it being taught over and over and connected to ideas of spirituality in the body. And we see that with both of these films, and especially Kill Bill with its emphasis on weapons and the introduction of different things like guns, but most importantly the blades, the katanas. We see that it's important that weapons are also tools for fighting in these rituals. It's a very complicated way of attacking and understanding a person, and that weapon can be an extension of yourself. But it's important that you know how to fight with just your body, which we see in both the 36th Chamber and in Kill Bill. So, expanding upon the idea of the myth within the ritual. So there's sort of, in both of the films, this idea of like a sacred nature to the martial arts. It's something that is intensively taught, and you're taught by other people who sort of understand how to use these practices, and the spirituality and the sort of reverence behind the trainings is what gives the trainings meaning. So especially at the Shaolin monastery, we see that they're living in a temple, and there's obviously very blatant connections to Buddhism, more specifically Chan Buddhism. And there's definitely an emphasis on not only just Kung Fu and that particular style of martial arts and learning how to do that, but the meditation and daily labor that sort of entrenches you in this world of, being part of a unit and believing in some higher power, and then using that power to protect yourself and others, which is what we see with our main character, Sante. And with when we're, sort of bridging into Kill Bill, we also see, we have that emphasis on learning about the martial arts. And we also see myth used in, especially Kill Bill Volume 2, as establishing the legacies of the founders of these particular practices, especially martial arts. We see with we see with Kill Bill the legend of Pai Mei, and this is told to her by Bill at a fire, and this is sort of a nod to the oral tradition of fireside storytelling, and this sort of establishes who he is before she goes to train with him and learns very important techniques. So both of these films have our heroes. We've got Sante, we've got Kill Bill, and they're sort of, and this is playing into the concept of Joseph Campbell and the journey of a hero, and both of these characters are sort of forced out of their ordinary world and have a personal vendetta against their enemy because of the death of their loved ones and misfortune brought onto their own lives. And so we see that their lives become dedicated to this concept of revenge, of sort of an equal hand for the pain that was and death that was brought upon them. So during their journey of, sort of revenge tales, they're able to quote unquote exact their revenge. But every step along the way seems to be a trial to see whether or not they'll be able to make it. And there seems to be this sort of, because they're heroes and this is their path, it seems fated. It seems that this is their higher cause or their calling, and that they're able to make it in the first place, especially because they survive such impossible odds of almost being, especially we've got Beatrice being on, the brink of death and making it back every time. And this isn't thanks to the skills and discipline that they're taught with martial arts. And then with another sign of this sort of idea that their revenge tales or fate is the fact that they're able to earn, and it's very hard earned respect from masters of the martial arts. And with the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, we're talking about the abbots that he trains at the monastery with. And he gets begrudging respect from some of them. Some of the abbots see his potential and hone him intensely to make sure he can, progress further into the chambers. And even when he initially comes upon the monastery, the fact that he was able to get there in the first place through his sort of wit, the head abbot mentions that, he might have an affinity for Buddha, so he's kind of fated to be there. And, so this idea of him wanting to learn martial arts in order to fight back against tyranny connects to this larger discussion in the movie about this insider versus outsider mentality, because this was a religious practice, it was a ritual that had a lot of power, that it gives a lot of power to the individual. It was sort of kept within the monastery. And, Sante sees that the outside world is clearly suffering because of tyranny, and he wants to, bring these practices out. But then there are questions of religion and the fact that Buddhists do not use violence. So, Sante is definitely struggling with this push and pull in between. But ultimately, him being able to leave and start the 36th chamber, and then eventually, it's insinuated that he's able to return and fully establish the 36th Chamber of Shaolin. The movie supports this idea that inaction can, it can cause death, and it can allow tyranny to sort of fester. Sante has this personal vendetta, especially because his family suffered, and then this bridges into the conversation of Kill Bill, with her having this personal vendetta against her almost being murdered and her baby being taken from her. And so she gets the support of masters like Hattori Hanzo, who crafts her sword for her, and Pai Mei, who teaches her the 5-point palm exploding heart technique. And it's definitely hard earned respect, but they sort of see her quest and they support her in this idea. For Pai Mei, this is before she sort of had this revenge quest, but definitely for Hattori Hanzo. And it's interesting to think about, as in comparison to Sante from the 36th Chamber, he's doing this to protect other people, and in Kill Bill, in Beatrice's instance in Kill Bill, I thought a really interesting quote from the film was, "It's mercy, compassion, and forgiveness I lack, not rationality." So it's interesting to think of a hero or protagonist of the film who isn't necessarily out to help or save others, but to sort of dish out what's coming for other people for wronging her. So, and there's a level of question about at what level can you leave the past behind? When are you not accountable for the things your former self has done, when it comes to her hunting down all these people who have established lives after they've harmed her so severely and ultimately suffer at her hands? And, she has, she's not fighting tyranny. This is a personal vendetta. And then you could think about it at the level of being able to kill Bill and stopping him from creating any more women who are like her. But the film does ask the question, does this cycle of vengeance ever really end? And with all of the people she kills along the way, are the children and the adults related to the lives of the people she killed, the people who are left behind, will they just merely repeat this cycle? So, it's... What the films do have in common are these main characters who are very skilled in what they do. They're very ambitious, and they manage to sort of build skill and discipline through just utter sheer will. And a very, very important function of both of the films is this concept of violence. So what is the function of violence in the 36th Chamber of Shaolin and the two Kill Bill volumes? So we see that combat, because we're talking about martial arts films, it's this idea of defeating an opponent, and this idea that you can either be really, really ruthless, or you follow some set of rules that, and you're respectful of their skill. The actual process of fighting is almost like a ritual. It's almost like a dance of it being structured in some way of trying to outwit and overcome your opponent. And with the 36th Chamber of Shaolin in particular, we have this idea of combat being, because we have this higher purpose of defeating tyranny, it's this idea that sacrifice in the name of unity with your comrades is what's right. You're doing the right thing. Even if you die, you'll become a martyr. And it's reflected, this idea of uniformity is actually reflected within the temple, because remember, we have this conversation around the insider and outsider mentality. And, one of the quotes that one of the abbots uses in the temple is the idea that uniformity of mind brings uniformity in movement. This is something that Sante learns in order to be able to use his movements to understand himself and to fight others. But it also brings up even just this statement, this teaching reflects the world around him. The inside is not so disconnected from the outside. And with Kill Bill, we have this idea of there being rules to battle. These are trained assassins. So while some of them do fight one-on-one, they'll purposefully, put down a gun if the other person has a sword, and they'll fight. For all those who do that, we also have characters who know not to play nice and know how to exhaust and outsmart their opponent if their skills are matched. So a great example of this is Oren and Beatrice in the first volume. Oren knows that she can exhaust Beatrice and sort of better her ability to fight Beatrice. And this speaks to the idea of how much the protagonists of both of these movies have to sort of withstand in order to meet their goal. So, 36th Chamber of Shaolin and both of the Kill Bill volumes have a lot more in common than you think they do, even though they're both kung fu movies and, have different protagonists, sort of live in different worlds. But they definitely do have themes of myth and ritual in them. And, they very much so center around these discussions of martial arts and what they mean.